Hello and welcome back to another video. So, with Highmaul, Mythic and LFR coming out, Blizzard decided to do two different interviews. The first one was with the Convert to Raid podcast, and the second one was with Final Boss. Overall, these interviews actually covered, again, quite a lot of useful and interesting information. It was nice to see interviews that were not full of kind of like, you know, the PR spiel and all that stuff. It was basically all just real info that's actually kind of useful, so hopefully you'll find this information to be pretty fun. As is the normal format, I'll go through stuff, give my opinion quickly, and just kind of move on. So yeah, that's what's going on. Now then, time to talk about just some of the general things that were covered between all of the interviews. So first of all, the team actually did not know what the plan was with no flying for 6.1. As we now know, of course, it has actually been decided that there will be no flying in 6.1, but it's interesting that they, well, flew so close to the fire. I guess that's an analogy when it comes to the no flying. I'm assuming that they've noticed that it was pretty well received overall. I think the recent MMO champion poll had a 68% approval rating, so with that in mind, I think they've probably just decided that it's okay to keep it for 6.1, and then in that patch just have, you know, more in-the-world content. So that's kind of nice. But don't worry, if you don't like the whole no flying thing, they did say on Convert to Raid that they're actually going to be adding new flight points and polishing up some of the old ones in patch 6.1. I think this is really good news because while the flight points are in general better than past ones, they really aren't fantastic. Another great bit of news is that they confirmed new Blood Elf models will be coming in 6.1. This is, well, it's pretty much great news. I mean, the models themselves look fantastic, at least based on the sort of small preview that they gave a while ago, so I'm definitely excited to see that. Well, I mean, I don't have a Blood Elf character, but they just look cool, and hey, more people getting cool things is always nice. Apparently we'll get more information on patch 6.1 soon, so whether that's Blizzard soon or soon, we don't really know. Now, with that 6.1 stuff covered, there's just one or two other general things that were covered. So, first of all, some of the worst hit servers during the launch period are actually the servers that were really busy during Wrath and TBC, but had populations tail off. Basically, more people came back than they thought, and that is what was pummeling the servers, which I suppose is pretty much what we all hypothesized, so hey, it just makes sense. Now also, they finally said that they do want to go back and add journal information for all raids, but it's not really a high priority because, well, they want to just be working on content that's new that will sort of serve all players. And I think that's actually fair enough, though what I would like is at least for loot browsing functionality to be added to the old raids. Do we need every mechanic written down and explained? No, all we really need is loot. We overpower most of that content anyway. So with that general stuff covered, it's time to talk about the Garrison stuff. So they said that overall they are quite happy with the pace of gearing from the Garrison. I think that's kind of interesting. I mean, I can say right now most of my gear upgrades have came from the Garrison. I've got lots of 645 gear, I've got one bit of 55 gear from my Highmaul raid mission, so I've been getting a lot of gear in my main. Now that said, I have been, I think, doing a pretty good job of managing my followers and doing all that stuff, but still, it's pretty fast, and I think it's interesting that this is the pace that they're happy with. I suppose for the majority of players, or maybe the people who are not min-maxing the Garrison specifically to Garrison followers, then maybe the rate would be a little bit more reasonable. Though certainly right now, I feel like I'm definitely getting quite a lot of gear from the Garrison. And with all that said, it is kind of satisfying, so I guess I can't complain too much. I'm having a decent amount of fun with it, and it's still gear that will be replaced for the most part once I get into Highmaul. Mainly tomorrow, I think that's, well, today, as of the time of this video coming out. Now also, they said that raid missions, well, having a raid mission pop up even, is not based on you failing or succeeding the previous one. This is kind of interesting. So if a raid mission pops up, say like the Highmaul one that gives 655 plus gear, and you fail it, well, that doesn't affect the chances of another one popping up. It's, I think, on a roughly 2.5 week internal cooldown that's semi-randomized or something. So that was interesting to hear. That means that it's extremely punishing if you fail one of these missions, so really just try to be extra careful and plan well for those happening. Now also they said that they're going to change things up so that followers can gain XP while inside buildings. That's certainly great. I've got a few followers in buildings that basically haven't been touched and are all pretty newbies, so definitely nice to have that happen. Also, they said that they are having some internal discussions about the quantity of maximum level missions that you can have. Now, currently there's a bit of a problem, well, I say problem, maybe it's a problem, maybe it's not, with the Garrison, where if you've got a full roster of level 100 followers, and especially lots of decently geared level 100 followers, you actually don't get that many missions spawn. You know, maybe you'll get a few a day, and it's kind of bizarre because you've got 25 followers, and no matter what mission pops up, you'll probably have followers with the right traits to deal with it, and it kind of removes a lot of the decision making and gameplay. It feels more like a drip-fed, I suppose, loot collection service in a way, which, yeah, it's kind of weird. I'm still having fun with it, with my max level followers though, and I've still got lots of headroom in terms of turning some rare followers into epic ones, but yeah, I'm interested to see what their conclusion on that is. Then they also said that they will be adding to the mission system by making new ones, giving better rewards with higher item levels in future patches, and then some hidden features. I think those hidden features are probably the more interesting things, and I really hope that they try to go a bit crazy and creative with future missions. Anyway, now that all that more generalized and Garrison stuff's covered, it's time to move on to raids. So first of all, I'll just talk about some basic raid things. They said that they like how the flexible system is playing out for normal and heroic difficulty, and personally I absolutely agree. Our guild's first raid is coming up very soon, and it's just nice that we can take like 15 people. You know, no one gets left out and we still get to do challenging content. That's great, and it's really just hopefully going to help out guilds and promote social content, which I think is a really, really great thing to happen. Now also, they said that in Warlords of Draenor, they are planning on there being a minimum of 2 raid tiers, however 3 tiers are still kind of possible. They're also aiming for a raid tier to last a minimum of 6 months. Overall, I think this is pretty much what we would expect. I'm personally hoping for 3 raid tiers, as I think the Draenor setting could definitely support it, because it's, in my opinion, pretty fucking awesome, so that's great to hear. And on this whole topic of the 6-month thing, well, yeah, I think 6 months is a very good minimum for a raid tier. If it's 5, it's too rushed. If it's 8 or 9, it's definitely too long. So around 6 to maybe 7 is, I think, the ideal time. I just really hope that there is a 3rd tier, and that perhaps the middle tier of the expansion involves some crazy alternate universe time-like stuff with the Naru popping up in Farallon, which, for your information, is the same as Netherstorm, you know, before it was wrecked. So that's what's going on there. Now, they also reiterated that they never want to repeat the Siege of Orgrimmar problem again. Well, good, that just means the developers are not insane yet. Also, they said that they are seeing that the group finder is making the community a bit more social. I suppose that was bound to happen. I mean, personally, I ended up in a TeamSpeak with a bunch of randomers on the first day of raids coming out, and had a great time with them, so certainly it seems to be working, and that's definitely a nice thing. Now, finally, in terms of general raid stuff, they said that Highmaul has, for the most part, been quite well received, so they're definitely happy about that, and they're also pleased with the tuning currently. So far from what I've done, like, Kargath was very well tuned for the encounter that it was, and Butcher was actually well tuned as well. I liked how I definitely felt like I needed to coordinate there. I thought that was really cool. Then Tectis was pretty tricky, and, well, that's all the bosses that I've done. Tectis, yeah, Tectis is fun. I'll hopefully get a kill on that soon. I'll be able to bring you a guide, but I know that I'll be steering, if possible, I'll be suggesting to my guild that we maybe try Brackenspore first, because he is apparently easier than Tectis. Now, also they said that Normal is tuned for players with Heroic gear, and Heroic is tuned for players with Normal gear. That is a terrible sentence. I'll rephrase. Normal is tuned for those with Heroic dungeon gear, and Heroic is tuned for those with normal raid gear. So that's really, I think, what we all expected. Personally, I do like that progression, and with a smaller raid like Highmaul, I think it's totally cool just to be able to hop between difficulty levels a little bit more. And really, with all that stuff in combination with the loot-based lockout, I just like the freedom and flexibility that it's kind of given us. Now, on Final Boss, there was quite the chat about graphics, especially from the melee perspective, and, well, what the Blizzard guy said is that they are working on having spells hit various parts of enemies so that they look a bit more sort of spread out and cool. I think that's totally nice, and maybe that will mean that, depending on where you're standing, you won't have all the spell effects sort of being funneled into where you're currently standing, which is nice. Now, in terms of the actual playability for melee, well, of course, I think Anna mains a paladin, so she was certainly quite interested to see what the devs had to say about this, but they said that essentially maybe they didn't do, or maybe they didn't go far enough with some elements of them tuning down the spell effects for other players, though that they are really happy enough with it, and what they're actually looking at doing more is having some sort of way of dealing with pets, because right now, pets really do obstruct melee players, and of course pets are clickable, so it really has a mechanical obstruction that is far greater than just a spell effect. A spell effect's annoying, but you can't misclick in a spell effect and then not perform your given task. So it's certainly good that they've decided to go in that route, and pets are really something that I think have been a bit of a pain in the ass for melee for quite a while. Especially if you've got multiple hunters doing stampede and then fire elementals running in and all that lovely crazy stuff. They also said that they would not have some sort of toggle or anything like that for other people's spell effects, such that maybe someone could just turn everyone else's spell effects down to the very minimum so they could hardly be there. Essentially, they want a consistent look for the game, and while I think it's, you know, cool like a StarCraft Pro, putting all the graphic settings to the lowest so everything's super clear, it's not really what they want for World of Warcraft, and they just want that baseline kind of cool look to the game. Overall, I would actually agree with them on that point. I just hope that they do fix up the pet issue. Now next, it's time to talk about stats and itemization. I'll go through this rather quickly, but they said that they are happy with the Warforged system, and in general, they're happy with, you know, the sockets, the tertiary stats, etc, etc, etc. I'd say that I don't mind them too much, but like right now, it's really the randomization that's killing me. Honestly, it's just very annoying how much worse a bit of gear can be. So for an example, a Warforged bit of gear can be worse than a regular Heroic Dungeon bit of gear because of the various things that can roll. In fact, bits of Heroic Dungeon gear can be better than 640 gear because of the way stats roll. Some of this stuff is a little bit crazy, and I don't like how that's just playing out. It means there's this annoying, super, just too random sort of version of gearing up, and I just think it's a little bit problematic. You know what, go watch Preach's video. I might do a separate video about this at some point, but Preach has got a great video on it. I think it's called Do the Math or something. Now also, they said that there will be another stat squish in a few years, but that's really a thing for the future. I think absolutely, and personally I don't really think they went far enough with the stat squish for Warlords. And maybe, you know, if we were doing, say, 10,000 DPS with half the health we currently have, then that would be a bit better. Now also, they talked about the Spirit stat and said that they're happy with how it plays out, and also that versatility is not really, it's not really anyone's best stat at the minute, which is their goal, but they said the DPS players should generally be happy enough with it to be on gear if that bit of gear is on a higher item level. Yeah, whatever, I think Spirit's fine, that's cool. Versatility is just boring as hell from a stat level. Like, just from a what it does level, you know, it's like flat increase, yawn, not interesting. I think it's bloat, I don't think it needs to be there, so I'd be happy enough if versatility was just, you know, cut from the game, and then we would have a bit less annoying, or, you know, fewer annoying variables to mess around with the randomness of gear. Now, they also said that they're happy with the removal of hit and experience. Again, I think I agree on that one. And they finally said that they like the uniqueness of all the secondary stats and don't have plans to add any more reroll functionality into the game. I've got to say that I would not mind being able to reroll bits of gear that are, you know, beyond the crafted stuff. That would be okay, and certainly in the AMA they did touch a little bit on the idea of perhaps maybe having it be a good idea that Apex's crystal stuff was random stats but also rerollable. Look, I think my opinions and all this are pretty clear. I just think that the randomness has been a little bit too overboard, and it's just made gearing a very muddy experience. That said, though, I have certainly enjoyed gearing up my character, so take what I say with a grain of salt, perhaps. I mean, there's definitely pluses and minuses to this randomized system, and it's... we'll just have to, you know what, see in a few months how this pans out once the dust has settled, and we're into more kind of formalized raid gearing. Now finally, I'm going to talk about class stuff. There was specific stuff mentioned for classes, but I'm not going to cover that here because really a lot of it's covered anyway by some catch-all things that they said. If you're really interested, then of course you can just check out these interviews on the respective websites or the front page of, I'd assume, like Emerald Champion or Wowhead. Now, first of all, they said that there is a balance pass coming out on Monday, roughly to the tune of about 5 to 10%. It might actually even be out by the time of this video, hard to know. Basically, they needed to see large-scale raid data in order to tune the classes a little bit more finely than they were able to at the end of the beta. Now, they did say that while some of the top specs may get tuned down a little bit, they will mainly be focusing on bringing weak specs up to the point where they are viable. I think that's definitely a nice way to do it. It doesn't feel like they're kind of punishing players or anything like that. Now, that said, they did specifically say that Windwalker, Marksmanship, and Gladiator will all be brought down a bit, and the Shamans and Mages will be buffed. Other than that, though, no real specifics. Now, also, they said that as far as balance goes, their goal is that everyone should be roughly equal in single target. However, beyond that, things like Burst, Small Group AoE, Large Group AoE, and then Cleaving are all niches that specs don't really need to be perfectly balanced on. I've got to say I agree with this as a design philosophy, and, you know, it definitely just leads to spec variation. You could have a spec that's just really awesome at blasting out a bit of burst DPS, or perhaps even a spec where, you know, if there's a big group of ads or trash or something, you can just watch the numbers roll in. I think stuff like that's fun and it's gratifying, and not every spec should have parity on some of those more niche elements. That also includes things like movement. Next, they talked a little bit about healing and said that overall they are pretty happy with how things are going. They did say, though, in, I believe, Convert to Raid, that they perhaps went a little bit overboard on some of the large healing spells in terms of their relative power, and that they may kind of bring some of those up or retune them a little bit in patch 6.1. So that was kind of interesting to hear. Now, they said that overall, though, they like how there is less overhealing going on, and that that's had a knock-on effect with Absorbs, where Absorbs feel a little bit better than they previously did to Blizzard. I suppose back in like the Siege days, you had so much overhealing that Absorbs were relatively quite a bit more powerful than raw heals, at least in many scenarios, so that's probably what they're referencing there. I don't play a healer, so I can't really speak to this from any area of experience or anything like that. You know, who knows though, I might actually try a healer during this expansion, hard to say. Now also, both interviews covered talents extensively, and the general rule the Blizzard said is that if a talent is mandatory due to its performance, they will buff the other two. This applies to all classes, and going over all of it will take too long. It seemed like many of these changes were going to be put back to patch 6.1, with the Monday class changes really being a little bit more based on tweaking some numbers, so we'll, again, just have to wait and see until, you know, Monday when all this information comes out. And then finally they said that the class pruning is not complete for some classes. They actually specifically mentioned the Shamans, which might get a second look at some point beyond patch 6.2. Look, well, I'd say that I don't have much of a problem playing my Elemental Shaman, but it does feel like it could have a few buttons removed, and there's got to be something they can do with the totem system, because I think it's kind of obtuse and a bit clunky the way that all works, and I don't find it to be very engaging. It's strange, I enjoy that spec as a caster, but I don't enjoy the totem element, which I guess makes me not really that much of a shaman when you get down to it. Anyway, that's really it for this series of interviews. I thought it was all really interesting stuff, and as always, it's great to hear the devs talk about game design and all that stuff. It's just interesting. Certainly, though, I cannot wait to hear about patch 6.1, especially with them, I think also between this interview and the AMA, saying that it's going to be more based on, like, extra outdoor world content in Draenor. So, what could that be? Really hard to say. Maybe I'll do a speculation video on it if I can manage to gather my thoughts, but that is a topic for another day. For now, thank you very much for watching the video. Please, subscribe, like, favorite, do a backflip, and all those great things if you feel like doing so, and I will see you next time.